You are 13 years old. It is 1888, and your jaw is starting to glow. Not glow like a lamp, glow faintly, greenish in a dark room. You noticed it 3 weeks ago and told nobody, because you know exactly what it means, and so does everyone in this factory. You work in a match factory in the East End of London. You are one of about 1,000 girls and young women in this building. Some are younger than you, some are 10. And the thing that is eating your face is also the thing that pays you. This is one of the best documented horrors of the industrial age, and it ends with 1,400 teenage girls doing something nobody expected. Your day starts at 6:30 in the morning. In winter, you walk to work in the dark and you walk home in the dark. You will be on your feet for 12 to 14 hours. There are no chairs, sitting is not permitted. If you arrive a few minutes late, the gate is shut. Late means losing half a day's pay, and half a day's pay matters. You earn something like 4 to 9 shillings a week. A skilled man in London earns 3 or 4 times that. Out of it you pay for your food, and often for your own brushes and paint. Many girls hand almost all of it straight to their family and keep nothing. The work itself is simple, and that is the problem. Wooden splints are cut, bundled, and dipped in a paste at one end. That paste contains white phosphorus. White phosphorus ignites from friction alone. That is the whole product. It is why these matches strike anywhere, on a wall, on a boot. You dip, you dry, you pack, 12 hours every day. The fastest girls fill more than 1,000 boxes a week. The air in the drying room is thick and sweet and slightly metallic. You stop noticing the smell within about a week. That is not because it went away. And then there is the system of fines. Talking while you work, a fine. Dropping matches on the floor, a fine. Going to the toilet without permission, a fine. Dirty feet in a factory floor covered in paste, a fine. Being late by minutes after walking miles, half a day gone. Some weeks the fines eat a large part of what you earned. There is a story from the time of girls being fined for the crime of untidiness. In a room where nothing could possibly stay tidy. You cannot argue. There are 100 girls at the gate who want your job. Now the detail that turns a bad job into a fatal one. There is no canteen. There is no washroom worth the name. You eat your bread at the bench with your hands where you work. Phosphorus is on the bench. It is on your fingers. It is in the dust. And so, 3 times a day, you eat a small amount of it. Nobody tells you this matters. Nobody in the room fully understands it yet. But your body is quietly absorbing a poison with a very specific target. It goes for bone. Above all, it goes for the jaw. It begins as a toothache. Just an ache in one lower tooth that will not settle. You do what everyone does. You ignore it because a dentist is impossible. Then the gum swells, then it will not stop swelling. Then it starts to smell, and you can taste it and nothing takes it away. The girls around you go quiet when they notice. Not because they are cruel, because they know what comes next. It has a name in the factory, said quickly, half under the breath. Phossy jaw. And then the part that sounds invented, but is not. In a dark room, the affected bone gives off a faint greenish-white light. Phosphorus glows. It is where the element gets its name. It means light-bearer. Girls described seeing it on each other in an unlit room. A soft shine along the line of the jaw from inside the face. Imagine being 15 and being able to see the illness from the outside. Imagine your friend seeing it before you have said a word. Now the treatment, in an age with almost nothing. The bone is dying. Infection spreads into it and will not stop. Left alone, it can reach the brain or shut down the organs. So the surgeon removes the jawbone. Not a tooth, not a fragment, the jaw. Sometimes part of it, sometimes the entire lower jaw. There is anesthesia by now, so you are spared the operation itself. What you are not spared is afterwards. Your face collapses inward. Eating becomes a project. Speech changes forever. And you are still, in many cases, a teenager. Those who refuse the surgery often do not survive the infection. And here is the fact that turns tragedy into something else. A safe alternative already existed. Red phosphorus and safety matches had been developed decades earlier. They did not cause this. They were already being made elsewhere in Europe. They cost a little more, and they would not strike on any surface. So the cheap, dangerous version stayed on the market. Other countries began banning white phosphorus. Britain, the largest producer, did not. Which means every jaw that came out after that point came out for a price difference. Then in June 1888, someone writes it down. A journalist and campaigner named Annie Besant interviews the workers. She publishes an article about conditions in a London match factory. It is titled White Slavery in London. It names the wages, the fines, the hours, the illness. The company denies it and demands the workers sign a statement calling it lies. And the girls refuse to sign. One of them is dismissed shortly after. And that is the moment the building empties. Around 1,400 women and girls walk out. Many of them teenagers, some of them children. They have no union, no savings, and no legal protection whatsoever. They are the least powerful workers in the richest city on earth. And they organize anyway. They march to Parliament, they speak to MPs directly. They tell the story in their own words, not through anyone else. The press picks it up, and London is forced to look at it. Public donations come in to keep the strikers fed. The strike lasts about 3 weeks. And then something happens that almost never happened. The company gives in. The fine system is abolished. Deductions for materials stop. The workers get a separate room to eat in, away from the phosphorus. And they form a union, one of the largest of women workers in the country. Historians treat it as a turning point in British labor history. It helped trigger a wave of strikes by unskilled workers over the next 2 years. 1,400 teenage girls moved the ground under an entire economy. But notice what they did not win. White phosphorus was still in the matches. The jaws kept coming out. It took another 22 years. In 1906, an international agreement moved to prohibit white phosphorus in matches. Britain signed, and the ban took effect in 1910. 22 years between the strike and the poison actually being removed. In that gap, more girls sat at more benches and ate their bread with the same hands. And one more thing the records barely mention. Not everyone who got sick was operated on and survived. Some simply stopped coming in. A girl is at her bench on Friday, and on Monday her place is filled. There was no sick pay, no compensation, no inquiry. Families hid the illness for as long as they could, because a girl known to have it would never be hired anywhere again. So the real number was always higher than the number anyone wrote down. So why do you not know their names? Because almost nobody wrote them down. They were young, poor, female, and considered unskilled. Every category that Victorian record-keeping ignored. We know the company, we know the campaigner, we know the year. The 1,400 are mostly a number. There are photographs of some of them, standing together, looking straight at the camera. Teenagers, in the middle of the biggest thing they would ever do. And here is what to take from it. Nothing about this was an accident of technology. The safe version existed. It was simply more expensive. The illness was known. It had a name people used casually at the bench. The fix was available for decades before it was applied. What changed it was not a scientist and not a politician. It was about 1,400 girls who decided they would not sign the paper. So the next time you strike a match, notice how boring it is. It lights, nothing happens. Nobody is harmed by it. That is not how matches started. That is the result of an argument that a group of 13-year-olds won. In London, in the summer of 1888. With nothing on their side except the fact that they were right.